Hello, my name is Jedediah Luczycki, also known as Jed. This is my project for the ES302 project design. And I'll show you what I worked on today or through this process and the design process that I went through. I decided to call this project the Claw because that's what I was trying to design. So this is our table of contents. As you can see, we have an initial design here. Or this is our initial concept when I came up with it. It was basically to create this claw grabber. A lot of people I think have had these before in their lives. They're pretty simple to understand. It basically is just a claw that you use to grab things from a distance. A lot of elderly people use them because it's tough to necessarily reach up to high places with them, and my grandmother has one, which is kind of what I was thinking about in this process, is like designing basically a claw grabber that elderly people could use, and preferably use a motor to run the claw pincer maneuver or the claw machine part, because I believe a lot of them use basically just a lever that you use to press in to hold and grab onto objects. But one big issue with that is if elderly people were the main, people that it's meant for. One issue is that a lot of them may, as well as they struggle with reach. A lot of them can also struggle with hand grip strength. So I wanted to see something where it's like, oh, you could just press a button, run a motor, and the pincher would grab something, and then you could grab it from there, and it would hold it. And for this process, I wanted to use a 4-bar linkage as the actual claw grabber. So that's basically what I tried to work on today, is using this 4-bar linkage to work as the pincers of a claw, where a gear system would run the motors, and then they would all be held in like one cage. So this is what I worked on. I went through a couple design processes. I designed basically the parts individually and put them together a couple times to see how it was going, so I could see if I was liking each individual part of the design. The first thing I really worked on perfecting was this 4-bar linkage. So I went through this design process. The first thing I developed this trapezoidal base plate, as well as these two smaller arms. Actually, they're of different sizes. They have about a 5 millimeter size difference. And then I had this initial pincher design that I used for the 4th bar. One of the big problems with this design was that the two different arm sizes, as well as the trapezoidal base plate, made it so that the two pincher arms would basically come in at an angle together and only contact at one small point at the end, which I wasn't really happy with. I wanted full contact or larger contact surface for the claw pincher. So I decided to transition that to this more square base plate design with two smaller arms. This basically gave me the motion I wanted, but it came into the issue where I designed that the base plate too small, so that the two arms, basically, when they were fully in the open position, it had a very small gap in between there, roughly about an inch. So that small gap I wasn't a big fan of. I wanted to have a larger mouth so that I could grab larger objects, or at least have a more space to grab an object. So I decided to change the design one more time to increase the length of the two arms, or the two longer arms. So the shorter and longer arm are the same size here, as well as length 3 and 4. So it's a trapezoidal 4-bar linkage. And the longer arms basically mean that this arm can, when it's in the open position, it has a larger mouth so it can grab larger objects, and then it can close at the same time. And then the full design for the 4-bar linkage is a double 4-bar linkage. Is basically one on top, one on bottom, does serve as the two pinchers, and they can move it in and out, and it has a much larger mouth that you can see there, which is one of the big things I was working on here. Moving forward to creating the gears, which was one of the most important parts if I wanted to actually have this claw function, I needed some way to have the two arms move at the same time if they were controlled by a motor. So I developed this initial set of gears. They were 21 tooth gears with a module of about 0.7. This basically made it so that they were pretty crappy gears, all things considered. The two gears didn't work well together. They had a lot of space in between the individual teeth, leading to a lot of motion of one of the arms would go far. The one that was being driven by the motor would go initially, and the second arm would lag behind and basically have this choppy motion since it wasn't getting 100% power from the other gear. It was only receiving partial inputs. So it would lead to one of the arms fully closing and then the other arm basically being a little bit open. And that was not a motion I was happy with. So I changed the gears to be these 24 tooth gears that have a module of 0.6. This basically led it so that these gears are almost fully in contact with each other with almost no tolerance. This makes it so that these gears basically run perfectly together. They're constantly in the same motion. So if you apply motor to one gear, the second gear turns at the exact same rate. This makes it so that the two arms basically close perfectly. They're perfectly in sync with each other, have the same exact motion, which is exactly what I wanted. It allows for this great smooth opening and closing motion, and it allows for the overall claw to be really tightly connected. And they work really well because they're also just on the edge of fitting in with the base plate, which is something I'm really happy about. It's basically fully encapsulated within that base plate that I designed. The pincher design process was the final part that I was working on here. I wanted to change the pincher design because I wasn't fully happy with what I've made a couple times. The initial design I made was this design here. It basically used a link. 4-bar link is the base, which served as the 4-bar, or one of the link to the 4-bar linkage, and then it had this extension onto it that it was the gripping part. My initial thought process was to include a groove section and a cutout. The idea with the grooves is that it would increase the friction, or at least give it more ability to grab onto something, and the cutout would allow it to grab stranger objects in case they didn't fit within the teeth normally. I wasn't a huge fan of it. It didn't look very good. I didn't like the design, so I decided to change it. I got rid of the cutout, and I streamlined the groove design to hopefully make it look better. The issue here, it was really tough to make the grooves actually work well with it, with this overall design. The grooves had a big issue in that they kind of didn't match with each other when they fully closed, as well as the fact that it basically lowered the overall surface area for grabbing if the object was rigid. So I decided to go with a different design. I eventually just pivoted to this flat design, so it looks just more like scissors almost. Flat design, it's just a trapezoid to hopefully give it surface area to be able to grab onto things, and that's basically what I went with in the end. Okay, so these are my full designs. My initial full design I rendered was this trapezoidal shape. It used the two initial gears I developed, as well as the original pinchers and the two differently sized arms. Of course, like I said before, the problem this one ran into was that the two pinchers would close at the end here and be at different kind of positions, even though they're meant to be at the same position. Eventually, I scrapped this, transitioned to my second design, which used a square base plate, as well as this larger 4-bar linkage design, which allowed it to have a much larger mouth. I still was on the original pinchers, and I didn't really like that. So the final design I was able to move on to was this design. It used basically everything I developed to the final step, and I'm really happy with it. It used the square base plate as well as the trapezoidal longer bar 4-bar linkage. It used those flat pinchers, and it used those really nice gears that basically make it so that it works perfectly. Closes right in line where I want it, works just how I want it. The analysis I came up with here. So this is just an analysis of the basically the linear position, velocity, and acceleration of the pincher, which is the most important part. The pinchers move horizontally and vertically at the same time, so that's where you kind of see that downward slope. And eventually everything, it has a little bit of acceleration at the start before it goes to zero, and then the velocity is basically constant throughout the motion. So really simple motion. I had the motor running really slow because the motor for this thing should probably go slow. You don't want it to clamp down on things. So I just had it pretty simple. It doesn't experience a lot of forces. And since I made the design out of aluminum, I wanted it to be lightweight, but also robust so that it wouldn't break. I thought about using some sort of plastic, but I figured that the plastic might be too weak for running a motor and lifting heavier objects. So I decided to transfer to a lighter weight metal like aluminum that hopefully could be hollow and hopefully prevent any breaking, but also be robust enough to withstand a motor. So I decided to transition to aluminum, which means that basically everything's really strong. The parts under the most stress here are these two back pins that are basically under the stress of moving it forward while also being torqued on by that gear and arm. Thank you for watching today, and I have one last thing to show you. I'd like to show you the animation I developed for this process here. This is a little animation of the claw moving, and that's basically the final thing I came up with. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the project I made. I had a lot of fun building it. A few things I think could be developed more. One thing I was working on was making a worm gear that would basically run these two gears so that you could have a longer arm out here and wouldn't have to have a motor like right here. But I was having trouble designing that. But I think that's one thing that could be upgraded. Another thing is, say, putting like a rubber edge on these two pinchers, I think is one thing that could be changed. And the base plate design. And I also was working on making a 3 pincer design, which I think would still be fun to finish. But I think that's just like the final thoughts I was having when I was nearing the end of the design process, things that I was like, oh, it could be fun to, improve the design another way. So thank you for watching. Hope you have a good day, and I hope you enjoyed listening to my design process. Thank you.